We're back this month with someone that could be the focus of at least 3 episodes, if not more. The home, skydiving. I admit, I've been tempted, but I figured enough things in this life are trying to take me down. Why give fate a real opportunity? I also admit, after listening to Isa, I'm rethinking my position, although I have no plans to visit a drop zone anytime soon. This was a fun one, and it fits perfectly with my goal of bringing a wide variety of homes into your lives through the podcast. Don't forget, this is episode 2 of a 3-part series. We started underwater with a scuba diver. Now we're going among the clouds with a skydiver. Next, we'll go far above the clouds with an astronaut. I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and if you are, please share it with a friend. Thanks. Okay, it's time to welcome my friend Isa to the podcast and start how I always start. So Isa, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Isa Watson. I am a scientist by training, a chemist specifically, but I run today a sports technology company, Squad, which is a fan intelligence AI infrastructure company that empowers professional sports teams, networks, and athletes around the world. Fun fact about me, I am one of 6 kids, so I don't know that I've ever experienced a quiet household. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. I am the author of a book called Life Beyond Likes, Logging Off Your Screen and Into Your Life. And last but very much not least, I am a licensed skydiver.
We're going to get into skydiving in a few minutes, but do you want to take a minute and share 2 things to round out the picture? What will readers hopefully take away from your book? You mentioned that you were an author.
Yeah, Life Beyond Likes was really inspired by this rapid growth of social media, not just the growth of it, but the integration of it into our lives. A lot of people conflate real life relationships with the people that you follow on social media and that you like their photos and you're like, oh, we're friends, we're caught up. But, one of the things we talk about in the book, and we use a lot of research to really support the takeaways from each chapter, is that friendship is an active investment, not a passive one. And a lot of people contextualize friendship as something that is supposed to be super easy. I don't have to put any effort into it. It should just happen. And nothing else in life just happens. When people want to engage in romantic relationships, you have to invest in that. When you want to get a good job or switch careers, you have to invest in that. And so, in a world that's, I say, optimized for followers, I always tell people, make sure you know who you can call on. Who can you call that will take your phone call, to share the good news, to share the bad news and everything in between. And deep friendship just requires intentional time, but it also requires presence. I always joke that I live in New York City, and I joke that when it's summertime, I can walk by any given restaurant with people sitting outside and half of the patrons are on their phone. But when I walk through restaurants or walk past restaurants in Champs-Élysées in Paris, people actually have their phones away and they're literally conversing and being fully present. So schedule time with your friends the way you schedule your nail appointments, the way you schedule anything else, because it requires intentionality. And the second thing is just to make sure that people build, retain, and invest in their own identity. Social media is, we call it a perfectionism echo chamber. So everyone's posting their highlight reels. They're posting their dope wedding photos. They're posting their new jobs. They're posting their children. They're not posting their miscarriages. They're not posting their divorces. They're not posting. And so you have to understand, like, what you're seeing is just a part of other people's lives, and not to be too hard on yourself and think that, I'm not doing enough or I don't have enough going on, because your full life is not the same as someone's highlight reels. Likes are not truth, I say. I say visibility is not value. The most important growth really happens offline in discomfort, discipline, and depth. So just make sure that you have a good grasp of who you are as a human and don't compare yourself to the highlight reels you see on social media.
And that is such good advice. I wish we had that from day one when this stuff was all taking off. The other thing I wanted you to just round out the picture of who you are was just, can you give us a quick elevator pitch on Squad so that people know what it's about and a little bit more of what fan intelligence and AI all come together to create?
Yeah, so where Squad lives in the sports ecosystem is an integrated technology in the apps that exist for teams, that exist for certain sports networks. So you wouldn't necessarily know that this is Squad unless you're familiar enough with the experience. But One of the things that we realized when we were creating this product and bringing it to real life was that social media made athletes and teams very visible. I look at some of my friends like Baron Davis. I think he retired from the NBA in 2014. He's going to have a much lower social following than current stars of today's NBA, but it didn't make them owners. And right now, most sports organizations are renting their fan relationships from third party platforms. So when you think about the data of who the fan actually is, Instagram has that. They're not giving that to the NBA. They're not giving that to Major League Soccer and others. And so Squad is actually changing that. Our platform, our technology helps teams and athletes actually own their fan relationship inside their own digital ecosystem. So that way you control the data, the community, and the revenue upside. We are basically taking the capabilities that third party social media has had off platform, empowering teams and organizations with that capability internally so that they can actually grow defensively.
Hopefully, people listening realize that knowing me, we could spend the entire podcast talking about Squad or your book, but that's not what we're here for yet. But let me get into the second thing that I usually ask people to do when they're introducing themselves is just share a little bit of context of how we know each other. Because I wouldn't say that we go way back, but we kind of go way back. How would you describe this?
You go way back in my brain. I don't go way back in your brain, right? That's the dynamic of it. And so when I was an MBA student at MIT Sloan, I was considering and pursuing a few different recruiting paths. One was investment banking, which I eventually did end up at JP Morgan, and the other was your consulting. And you were, I don't know if you were like one of the consulting recruiting leads for Bain at MIT at the time, but I just remember in the process they were like, "Oh, Keith Bevins, he's the OG consultant. Like, if you meet Keith Bevins, like, he doesn't really take a lot of meetings with people, but like and so we had exchanged emails and I think maybe spoken once or twice. And you were very helpful and instrumental in my own Bain recruiting process, even though I ended up selecting a different path. And then later on, reconnected, 14 years later, 15 years
Something
later.
like that.
Yeah. And then found out that we actually had a lot of mutual connections, in the industry, just a lot of interconnectivity. So the world is small for sure. And first impressions, they say they matter, and I've always considered that to be cliche, but now that I'm talking to you 15 years later and my first impression is still etched in my brain of like, oh, Keith is like the OG Bain partner.
That's funny. It's weird because I wasn't in my recruiting role when you were at Sloan. I was involved in recruiting, especially for some of our diversity recruiting efforts. But a couple years after you left, I took on my current role, leading recruiting for consultant hiring. But what's really neat is I do get to meet a lot of people. And what's crazy is, despite my profession, I'm terrible with names. I remember faces. I remember numbers. I joke with my wife because I remember all of my childhood friends' phone numbers, but I can't remember the name of somebody whose hand I just shook 5 seconds ago. And there's probably an MIT joke in there somewhere, but it's always just cool to meet people. And so
Yeah.
I respond to everybody that reaches out because a lot of people that have been my mentors have done that for me. And so when I saw your name pop up in the inbox, I was like, that sounds familiar. And then you said, oh, we met when I was at Sloan. I was like, what's up? What do you got? And I think you connected me with one of your mentees and we're off and running there. But you
Yeah.
just never know where the journey's going to take you. So I always reach back when people reach out to me because you just
Mhm.
never know who's on the other side. And
Yeah.
it turns out we probably should have known each other at least 10 years ago, if not earlier.
100%.
So I want to get into skydiving, which you mentioned in your intro. And aside from all the other things we could have pulled the thread on, skydiving is the part of your bio that really reached out to me and said, whoa, you gotta talk to Isa about this. How did you get interested in skydiving? And how do you get the first taste of it? Like, there's some things that you can kind of ease your way into, but jumping out of a plane seems like kind of a binary thing. Either you do it or you don't. So what was your first taste of this thing?
It's interesting. I'm a nature girl. I live in New York City, but my origins are from North Carolina, where I had a lot of pets, a lot of chickens. I ski a lot. And I've always found peace in being outside and having serene experiences outside. Skydiving had been on my mind for a minute as something I wanted to try. it wasn't a priority for a long time, but I remember one phase of my founder journey where I was feeling particularly stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Really, just there was a lot of pressure on me, and I was like, I need an outlet. I need something that is going to give me grounding energy. Some of these times I actually just kind of pick up in travel places. And I remember spinning the globe. I walked past the globe and I spun it. And then I said, wherever my finger lands is where I'm going to go next. And my finger landed in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the closest thing to that was this little country named Mauritius. And for those listening that don't know where Mauritius is, it's about 1,000 miles east of Madagascar. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to go to Mauritius. So I'm in Mauritius and, I love it. It's great. And I was like, well, if I'm going to skydive, I should skydive over the middle of the Indian Ocean as opposed to skydiving stateside. I never thought that it would just be a long-term thing for me. I was just going to try the activity.
Sure.
I called the skydiving drop zone multiple days because they weren't taking planes up because of visibility and of winds. And as a skydiver, you learn to study the winds, and certain winds are too strong for you to be jumping, visibility, etc. I finally just was hounding them enough, and I was like, "Can we just go up?"
Just
I was
just to
like, "I'm
fly in the
fine with
plane?
visibility, huh?"
Like just to fly in the plane?
No, I want to jump out. I was like, it's fine. Even if visibility is a little janky, I was like, can we go? And I can't say that they definitely like opened up the center because of me, but I definitely called and emailed like 4 days in a row. And it's interesting because I was talking to my friends backstage side and they were like, I'm sorry, you're just going skydiving after breakfast. Like, that's what we do now. And one of the things, it has a very like not polarizing, but there's a very bifurcated response when people tell you you're a skydiver. Some people are like, "Whoa, are you crazy?" And
Right.
then other people are like, "Wow." And so I have to say that from the time I was a little girl, fear just never registered for me. I was like the first person to jump in like a 12-foot pool of my friends and the first person to start riding crazy roller coasters. So I went to the drop zone, got sick there. You do a little class on the ground, safety instructions, all that jazz. Went up in this very unconventional plane. I mean, it had no seats in the back. It was just two seats. That was the pilot and the co-pilot. So I'm sitting on the floor of this very small plane. It's tandem, which is when you fly with somebody attached to your back, an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
You're like sitting on their lap in this plane. It's just like, I'm like, all right, this is crazy. And then you just kind of roll out because you don't have enough space. But when I got up to altitude, which was, I think, 12,000 feet over there, I was like, all right, I'm about to roll out. I was like, I have one last chance to say no if I don't want to do it. But then when we first started free falling, the first 5 seconds, I was like, holy crap, my stomach has dropped all the
It
way down to the ground.
is it like a roller coaster, like that same feeling, but like longer?
It's a roller coaster, that same feeling. For me, it's like the first 10 seconds out the plane.
Okay, which is a really long drop on a roller coaster. I mean, that is an eternity.
It's like the first 10
Oof.
seconds. But I will say, I did get my license and jump a lot more. That lifted. Like it was like the first time, the first 5 to 10 seconds. But when I tell you, Keith, this was the most serene and peaceful experience I had ever had in life to date. I even taking and absorbing the earth and the world from that height, like with my feet dangling in the air. Like it was just, it's hard to put into words. I landed and I was like, can I go back up? And they're like, sorry, we have other
Right,
customers.
we're done for today.
Right. But then I came back to the States. The very next week, I took my mother, who is 66 years old, and she's afraid of heights, by the way. I was like, and then I jumped again and I was like, man, you know what? This is just too good for me to just be having my experience imposed by this tandem instructor on my back. I need to
Right.
go get licensed. And so that's when I decided to start ground school and go get officially licensed.
Now, was this instant? It sounds like that first jump, you were hooked. Longtime listeners will know we've had a few people on that talk about their home. Brother Murdoch talked about, getting on horseback. And the first time he was up on the horse, he was like, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. It sounds like it was the same thing for you when when you took that first skydive.
Absolutely. I mean, I probably knew like 15 seconds into the jump. I was like, oh, going to be one of my things. It was very instant. And, I wrote in my book, I did a chapter with Carmelo Anthony, who, is an NBA Hall of Famer. And one of the things that Melo talked about in our interview was the quest for peace and what that will look like once you found it. And Mello always said to me, he said, Isa, once you find that peace, you are never going to go back to anything where you didn't feel that. Skydiving, I just felt this insane amount of peace. I was like, this is too addicting. I never thought I would have an addiction to peace, but hi, my name is Isa and I'm addicted to peace. And skydiving gave me that.
And just in case anybody has doubts, it's one thing to say your home is running, where you can go out and run after work or something like that. But skydiving feels like a bigger investment. So is this like an occasional thing? Have you done this a dozen times, 20 times? How many times have you actually done this that it's your home?
Yeah, I've done it about 200 times. It's interesting, even though if the winds are collaborating and the drop zone isn't super busy, you can probably get a good like 7 jumps in a day. That's probably on average built up around 3 or 4 jumps in a particular day. So when you go to the drop zone, you're spending pretty much like all day there. You go there before the first plane takes off, and then you just plan to stay there, the whole day and get as many jumps in as you can. And there are plenty of times, plenty of days we spent on the drop zone where we couldn't jump because the winds weren't cooperating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I have to ask this before we move to the meat of this thing. Any other adrenaline habits? Like, are you a bungee jumper? Do you do base jumping? Do you do any of that kind of stuff?
I don't do base jumping and bungee jumping. Funny enough, skydiving is actually significantly more safe than base jumping. The data on base jumping is bad. Like, in fact, one of my skydiving instructors died about 6 months ago from base jumping in Utah. He was one of my favorite instructors, and I still have videos with him. And so I caution people against base jumping, especially with a wingsuit. But skydiving, funny enough, it's actually quite regulated with the FAA and the United States Parachute Association. But I don't think skiing is adrenaline. Like I am a black slope skier, but and I have a tracker on my phone, so I'm like, okay, this past season I got up to like 50 miles per hour on skis, but you know,
Just another day in the life.
yeah, day in the life.
So I want to start getting into some of the parts of skydiving that are special for you. Where do you think we should start?
Let's start with the people. I grew up an athlete, and I find that even in my work life, when I work with people who have played on team sports, they end up on average being a little bit more coachable. There's certain dynamics, certain things that you build. And so I always find that there's certain communities that have, similarities that are very interesting. With skydiving, the community is such an inclusive community of people from all walks of life. People who, have the Harvard and MIT degrees, people who have never finished high school, people who, are very wealthy, people who are very poor. And, one of the things I found, I was like, this is interesting. All these different people, what is the through line? My
Mm-hmm.
brain is always looking at like, what's the data? What's the summary of the data? And the one thing that I found was that skydiving, it was a common use case for people to seek out skydiving as part of their own healing journey,
Mm-hmm.
as they experience some brokenness in some way. Like, we have, there are a number of my skydiving colleagues who struggle with addiction in their prior lives, or, whatever other component of life and its hardships. But when you are in an environment where people have been through some things in life, I myself, I include that. And I also think that losing my dad very tragically in a bus accident, to, some of the founder ups and downs, it becomes a very addicting community because of the support, the level of widespread empathy, the level of really, really broad life experience, just coming together and existing in a community where there is no hierarchy.
Right.
There's so many people I've met in skydiving where I would never meet them in my normal life. I would never even come across them. And I think that that is one of my favorite things about skydiving.
I like the part about getting outside of my bubble. Like my photography puts me in touch with different communities that have nothing to do with my day job or my corporate life. And frankly, a lot of other circles that people would identify me with. And it's almost just the love of the culture or the love of the art in the case of dance or other communities that I'm in. And that's what brings people together, and sort of nothing else matters when we're in that bubble.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that I realize about the way that we live life today, I'm MIT, Cornell, Hampton, ex JP Morgan, ex Pfizer. You know, you have these networks that you're automatically in, or I'm part of a sorority. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I have my sorors, wherever else. But one of the things that, and then if I'm, let's take it digitally, right? I open Instagram. What are they going to do? They're going to feed me the things that they think I like. And it's already the things that I'm familiar with. And so when it comes to actually exposing yourself to different things in life, because there's so much automation and personalization that exists in our analog and digital lives, we actually have to seek that out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, skydiving, I didn't even know I needed that, but I needed it. I needed like a different community that was outside of, you know, my day to day, my week to week. And like I said, it's been really grounding.
And I have to ask more out of personal curiosity, but my wife and I started following this one guy on Instagram who has he has a thick Jamaican accent, and he just keeps talking about things he's not going to do. And he just has videos of people doing crazy stuff like, you know, climbing mountains, you know, base jumping, doing all this stuff. And it's funny because in a lot of circles that I'm in, people sort of don't associate the Black community with some of those things. And I would put skydiving in the those things category. So are you a unicorn? If I were to go to a drop zone here in Chicago or in New York or in Mauritius, you know, are there people like you in the community?
You know, there's definitely Black skydivers. It's not a lot of us. Like, I think even in our Facebook group of, you know, Black licensed skydivers, I think there may be like 200 people in that group,
Mm-hmm.
which out of the, I think there's 17,000 people who are licensed, or close to 20,000 people who are licensed skydivers in the United States. But I will say that the group is very cohesive,
Mm-hmm.
and we know, you know, we
Right.
know who each other are, right? And so I remember I went to a drop zone in Arizona because it was winter. And I walked up to the drop zone. You have essentially, it looks like a mini gym, but it's where people are packing their
Mm-hmm.
parachutes. And so I went to get my jump passes, etc. And there was this Black girl, Alicia, who I had seen on Facebook, who
Right.
was in Chicago. And then we were like, oh my God. And then we were just like doing all these TikToks together about like, okay, Black girl met Black girl skydiver. And so it's like that. So it's we're not large in numbers, but we're massive in spirit. And you'll if you go to a DZ, depending on where you are, you may see a few
Right.
potentially.
Right.
Generally not though. And the thing I want to address though, the Black community skydiving as well, you know, it's interesting because I think that just by the nature of experience of being a Black person in America, our risk profile, our risk tolerance is a little bit different. Even like when you lose your job, if you're Black, it's harder to get back on your path. It's, you know, all these things,
Right.
right? I am personally responsible for about 10 Black people taking their first skydive, actually, and I am counting. So, you know, it's funny because they actually, I don't know if it's that they're so unfamiliar with it or that they're like actually scared of it. Because when they start asking me questions and they're like, oh, wait, you fly with two parachutes and you fly with an automatic deployment device in your rig so that if you are falling at a certain velocity at 1,000 feet, it automatically deploys a second parachute. Oh, so we're going to land anyways? Oh, I didn't even think about that, right? So when you
Right.
start explaining all the safety mechanisms and protocols, they're like, oh, okay, I'll try it, right? And so I've definitely been on a quest. I've been recruiting my fellow brothers and sisters, and I have to report I am 100% success rate at, oh my God, I love that. I'm so glad I did it.
I said, thanks for sharing about the people in the community. And as much as I like to say it seems like a crazy idea, I will admit that my mom celebrated her 60th birthday by going out and skydiving. And I remember she said, hey, I'm thinking of skydiving for my birthday. And my only question was, is your insurance current? And when she said yes, I said, cool, have a good time. It is something that I think people, the more they learn about it, are more interested in and feel a little bit more comfortable even considering it. What else makes skydiving so special for you? You talked about being a scientist and a little bit of a nerd. Maybe my summarization up front. Is there an aspect of that in skydiving?
Yeah, there is. Skydiving is actually highly technical. Before I skydive, I did not have the appreciation of the technical aspect of anyone who works in the air, whether you're a pilot, etc. I've always been a numbers person, an analytics person. In fact, people in undergrad, they used to always tell me, they're like, you should go to law school because you would be a fire litigator and I would be really scared of you in the courtroom.
Right.
And so I actually took the LSAT. I did really well. But I was like, when I started looking at law school, I was like, it's way too many words, not enough numbers. And so, and so then, obviously I still pursued science, economics, etc. But skydiving is very technical. The first thing that you do on the DZ is, and the first one of the earlier things you learn to do in ground school is read winds. People say, how do you read the wind? There are no words, right? But it's winds go in different directions. Most people don't know that a wind can be going at a certain speed and certain direction at 9,000 feet, and a different speed in a different direction at 6,000 feet. And so it's not just what are the ground winds doing, it's what are the upper winds doing, right? Are the winds heading southwest? Are they heading southeast? Oh, okay, here's some crosswinds. How do we land in a crosswind, right? And so with skydiving, it dictates not just your flight pattern, but it dictates where the plane drops you off. And we have an order to skydiving. So the people who are going to be falling the slowest get out first. Yeah, and then the plane is continuing to go. People who are, the wingsuiters are the last people to jump out the plane because they can also get back and they're flying faster. The wingsuit empowers them to fly a bit faster. So there's a lot of physics to it. There's a lot of studying the wind patterns to dictate your landing pattern. Are you doing an L shape into, the west because the winds are coming this way, or et cetera. Southwest, oh shoot, we have to switch 45 degrees. And so people have to have a fluency with certain like physics elements in order to skydive. And if you don't, it's one of those things too that I appreciate because there's no nepotism in skydiving, right? If you don't understand winds, you're never going to get licensed. When you are actually licensed, not only do you have tests that are essentially jumps, so you have 25 of those at minimum. Most people fail a jump or two and have to repeat it. You have 25 of those at minimum that you're demonstrating different capabilities. But you have oral exams as well, and you have written exams. And so you can't BS your way or chat GPT your way
Right.
out of, an oral exam when your coach is asking you about how would you handle this one situation, that one situation, et cetera. And so I really do like it for that reason. And I was like, oh, maybe I do kind of like physics after all.
Now, would your childhood friends think that this was a surprise, or are they sort of listening? Would they be listening to this and this conversation going, yeah, she was always that girl?
The latter. People were like, yeah, she was always that girl. Yeah, she was always crazy. My cousin texted me the other day. He was like, do you remember as soon as we became the height to do all the roller coasters, how you were the first one in line? You were the first one down the like water slides and we were all scared and we wouldn't go up. And you were like, what? Let's just do it. And he was like, we were like 10 years old. So people would say it to me. They're like, oh, she's always been like that. And my dad was a computer engineer and his old school engineer too, immigrant engineer. His philosophy in life was if you can't build it, you shouldn't be using it. So at 7, he would make me build my own computers. If I, to use my computer, I had to build it. And so they would be like, between that and the just daredevil, they called me a daredevil, as a child. I told you fear does not register to me. Like I'm not going to do anything. It's calculated risk for
Hmm.
me.
Of
I'm
course.
not going to walk off a building and be like, you know what, I'm just gonna, but I'll study it and I'll say, okay, I'll do it. And I don't even hesitate.
Let me ask you, once you've done the prep on the ground, you've packed your chute, all those things, you're up in the plane. Can you walk me what it's like before the jump and then through the dive itself? Because you talk about this piece, and I think for a lot of people listening, at least maybe I'll just speak for myself, my heart would be going 150 beats per minute. There would be no peace until I was back on the ground. But walk me through, once you're up in the plane, what's going through your mind, and what's it like when you first jump out and the rest of the descent?
So it's two different experiences before and after for me. Before, I'm in my head and I'm very quiet. And if I'm flying with a team, we have formations like, A, C, like letters and then numbers. So we'll say, okay, this is going to be AC 17, AC 17, and you do that as many times. And that's like in skydiving, when you're competing, that's the number of points you get. And so for me, I'm like in my head doing my moves. Or if I'm just jumping out with a friend, I'm still in my head. I'm figuring out like what are we doing, making sure that I'm comfortable with the winds and the drop zone and aware of what's going on. So another thing in skydiving is that the pilot, before the door opens, the pilot will announce based on the speed of winds what our second gap is. And so he'll say 7 seconds, 6 seconds. And it is everybody's job in the plane to go out on your time. If you don't go out on your time, what's going to happen is that the people who are jumping out last won't have enough time to make it back to the drop zone. And that does happen. And so I'm concentrating
Mm-hmm.
hard in my head and making sure I'm paying attention. And then I'm also checking my equipment. I actually have gone out with some of my equipment like not fully pushed in and stuff like that. And my coach, like, I was out the door by the time she saw it. But thankfully, it wasn't like catastrophic. But your equipment check is incredibly important. And then you have someone else check your equipment too,
Mm-hmm.
and you check somebody else's.
You mean out
So,
the door? Sorry, you mean out the door, like out the plane door?
yeah, out the plane door.
And she caught it after you were out the door?
Yeah, I was already like on my way out the door, but it was one of my I forget the name of it, but it wasn't pushed in fully and I didn't even realize it. But it's okay. It would have just deployed my parachute before it was ready, but that's fine. I'd rather deploy too early than too
Too
late.
late. Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
And then once you go out the door,
yeah. So
what's it
once I go
like?
out the door, it's like it's a different thing. So like I'm like, okay, have you ever given a speech and you're like, you know what, I'm a little bit nervous, I'm a little bit nervous. But then when you start and you nail those first two, three sentences, you're like, okay, I got my groove, I'm
Every
good.
time, every single time.
That's how skydiving is for me. Like I'm like, you know what? Okay, I jumped out, I didn't like flip any kind of way. I got my order, I'm good. But it's two phases of landing for me. And skydivers don't call this first phase landing. I'm just saying it. But in preparation for landing, when you deploy your parachute at like 4,000 feet or so, you start to kind of get information. You're looking like I did the first thing you do, you check your equipment, you make sure that your canopy is straight over your head, your brakes as well, and then you look for the drop zone and you're like, okay, it's over there.
Oh
Or
my
you're like, I
gosh.
have to turn around, or I have to like that's the second thing you do when you get out the plane. So once I've done that, my canopy is straight over my head, my equipment, because I've had my brakes up here before and I'm like, okay, I gotta get that down, right? Then I'm just cruising. And when I tell you that is such special me time, I love it. Like nobody is bothering me. I'm just taking in the world and the air up there is just different. No one's bothering me. And then landing when you're coming in for the land, it's like, okay, am I at the right altitude? I twisted my ankle once on a landing, and that wasn't fun.
Mm-hmm.
But once you land, people say Do you go back to normal? You just go back and,
Right.
I don't think you come back to normal. I think every landing, every skydiving experience is an expansion of you. Every jump, to be honest, recalibrate something, and not in a dramatic way, but a subtle way, because in your head, in your body, like your tolerance for uncertainty shifts, your relationship to fear shifts, your trust in yourself shifts. And so you don't suddenly land and become invincible, you land and become clear. That's my experience. I see it as like a controlled risk.
Hmm.
Obviously I'm a good student. I study the wins, making the decision, come into the exit. But I think all of that just really sharpens your thinking, and it reminds you that even if I was fearful, fear is just information. It's not a stop sign. It's all about powering through the discomfort of fear. And I will tell you, every time I power through the discomfort of fear, whether it's skydiving, other things in my personal life, I feel stronger and I feel more equipped on the other side. And so I think you get something every time you jump, not adrenaline, not ego or anything like that, but you get data about yourself and you get a recalibration that's very grounding.
So I want to thank you for coming on today. We were talking when we started. Founder life is real and it doesn't take breaks, but you are taking a little bit of time out of a very busy schedule to prep and to record this conversation. When you reached out to me, you reached out for something totally different. And I was like, who is this person that's reaching out? I remember the name. And then I read your bio and I was like, wait a minute, skydiving. And I immediately reached back, if you remember, and was like, hey, would you ever want to come on and talk about skydiving? And I'm not going to lie, that was maybe 2 weeks ago. And so I
Yeah.
really appreciate you doing that. If people want to learn more about what you're up to and some of the
Mhm.
things you mentioned here on the podcast, where can they go?
Yeah, for me, obviously I'm on LinkedIn. I have isawatson.com. There's a contact form to reach me there. And then on socials, there's at Squad for Sports and at Isa D Watson, though I'm a lot quieter on Instagram. And then the book, Life Beyond Likes, Logging Off Your Screen and Into Your Life, you can just get that wherever books are sold. Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
All the places. And if people listening to this were thinking about considering curious about skydiving, where should they start? I imagine you don't want to just find somebody with a plane like you would find somebody to help you at home, like out in the Home Depot parking lot. There's probably a little more to it than that. But where should they start?
From a curiosity perspective, there are a lot of great YouTube videos on what is skydiving, what does it entail. A lot of people don't realize that if you're not licensed independently in the United States, you can't fly out, you can't jump out the plane alone. So I hear a lot of people using that as a deterrent to skydive. They're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, you don't need to know what you're doing. You just need to, hook up to your tandem person. So I think YouTube is as a
Mm-hmm.
start. And then the second thing is just go to Google and type in skydiving drop zone near me. And it'll show you the closest drop zone. And then read the reviews, like see what people are saying about the reviews. Some drop zones are better than others, but I would say all of the licensed drop zones that you're going to see, like I said, skydiving has pretty strong, regulations and rules. And so, yeah, and then you sign up for a tandem jump where you'll have an instructor on your back, and tandem instructors are the most experienced skydivers in our industry. Like my tandem instructor has 17,000 jumps. He has more jumps than he's been alive, like than the days he's been alive. So, yeah, go to YouTube, Google skydiving drop zone near me, and then go register for a tandem. It'll be in between $200 and $300, but probably the best $300 you've ever spent.
And it's cheaper than therapy.
Oh yeah, it's definitely cheaper than therapy.
I said, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate you sharing about your home skydiving.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeisspecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.